As he smirked across the aisle, he was certain she would walk away with nothing. What he didn't know, what his army of high-powered lawyers didn't know, was that Genevieve had a secret of her own. The air in the Davenport penthouse on Park Avenue was always the same. She had learned to navigate its silent, cavernous rooms, to smile at the appropriate charity galas, and to overlook the increasingly frequent nights her husband, Preston Davenport III, came home smelling of expensive whiskey and a perfume that wasn't hers. Publicly, they were the golden couple. Genevieve, with her quiet elegance and art history degree, was the perfect accessory, beautiful, intelligent, but never so much as to overshadow him. The cracks at first were hairline fractures. A string of late nights at the office that coincided with photos of him on gossip sites leaving a trendy Soho club with a rotating cast of models. He would always apologize, not with sincerity, but with gifts. He wasn't apologizing for his actions, he was paying a fee to restore the peace. The fissure finally broke open on a Tuesday. There was no grand explosion, no thrown vase or tearful confrontation. It was a quiet, cold realization. It was a $50,000 charge from a jeweler in Las Vegas. A 22-year-old influencer was showing off a new, breathtakingly expensive diamond necklace. The caption read, "Vegas treats me so well. Feeling like the luckiest girl in the world." She had tagged the hotel, the same hotel Preston was supposedly not at. That was it. The love was gone. Sam, ever the pragmatist, asked the question Genevieve had been dreading. The prenup. She remembered the day vividly. It wasn't a request, Lawrence didn't request, he commanded. His office was a testament to power, dark mahogany, a wall of windows overlooking the financial district, a silence so profound you could hear the leather on his chair creak. He had slid the thick document across the desk. "A formality, Genevieve," he'd said, his voice smooth as polished granite. She, a 24-year-old art student completely overwhelmed by the scale of the Davenport world, had felt the immense pressure to be agreeable, to prove she wasn't the gold digger the tabloids were already whispering she was. The divorce proceedings began with brutal efficiency. Preston hired Gregory Thorne, a lawyer whose reputation was as sharp and merciless as his tailored suits. The cars, the art, the jewelry, all of it, they argued, belonged to the Davenport family trust, not Preston, and was therefore protected. "It's a joke," Jenna, her lawyer, Anna Sharma, had said, her dark eyes flashing with indignation. "They're trying to bully you into submission." The first preliminary hearing was set. The harsh fluorescent lights were a world away from the soft, flattering glow of the chandeliers she was used to. She wore a simple navy dress, her only jewelry the wedding band she hadn't yet been able to take off. He thought this was just another business transaction he was destined to win, another problem his father's money and power could make disappear. He saw her not as the woman who had shared his bed for 7 years, who had held his hand at his mother's funeral, who had tried desperately to build a real life inside their gilded cage, but as a minor inconvenience. Gregory Thorne rose, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "This document, which we have submitted as Exhibit A, clearly outlines the separation of assets. It is, for all intents and purposes, ironclad." He placed a copy on the table with a theatrical thud. Genevieve felt her stomach plummet. The room seemed to tilt. This was it. The end. He was already planning his celebration dinner. He had handled dozens of high-profile divorces for New York's elite. "Ms. Sharma," Judge Hawes said, her voice dry, "your response to Mr. Thorne's assertion? It appears on its face to be a standard, albeit complex, prenuptial agreement." Anna Sharma rose gracefully. She was shorter than Thorne, but she commanded the space in front of her with an entirely different kind of energy. Not brute force, but precision. "Your Honor," Anna began, her voice clear and even, "we do not dispute that my client, Ms. Hayes, signed a document on the date in question. We also do not dispute the contents of that document as presented by opposing counsel." "What is she doing?" Anna let the silence hang in the air for a calculated moment before continuing. My client was young. She was in love, and she was under immense pressure from a very powerful family to, as they put it, not cause any trouble. She signed it, believing it was a prerequisite for the marriage she so deeply desired. Anna paused, turning her gaze from the judge to look directly at Preston. What we are here to contest, Your Honor, is not the existence of the prenup. We are here to contest its fundamental validity. Preston looked relieved again, his arrogance flooding back. This was just a desperate last-ditch effort. Judge Hawes looked unimpressed by Thorne's theatrics. Anna took a slow breath, her gaze locking with the judge's. She took a step closer to the judge's bench. However, it does not bear the signature of the other party to the marriage. It is not signed by Preston Davenport III. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. What? That's a lie. I signed it. I was there. Sit down, Mr. Davenport. Judge Hawes barked, banging her gavel once. Thorne, recovering quickly, sputtered, Your Honor, this is an absurd and outrageous allegation. Of course, my client signed it. We have the executed copy right here. Her voice dropped, becoming icily precise. It is the signature of his father, Lawrence Davenport. The bombshell landed with the force of a physical explosion. The room erupted. He turned to his lawyer, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and panic. What is she talking about, Dad? He mouthed towards the gallery. He had built his entire case on the unshakable foundation of this ironclad agreement, never once thinking to question the authenticity of a signature from a client he'd represented for years. Judge Hawes's face was a thundercloud. Yes, Your Honor, Anna said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. We have the document. We have the expert witness. And we have the truth. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the dawning, horrified look of a man who was no longer in control. A man who was beginning to understand that the puppet strings he thought he was pulling were actually attached to him, and his father had just let them all go slack. But inside Genevieve's mind, the courtroom's chaos faded away, replaced by the ghost of a memory from 7 years prior, a memory she and Anna had painstakingly reconstructed. Meeting Preston had been a whirlwind. She was an intern at a small art gallery in Chelsea, and he'd come in to purchase a painting for his father's birthday. He was impossibly charming, disarmingly funny, and he'd looked at her not like she was a part of the scenery, but like she was the only masterpiece in the room. Their courtship was the stuff of movies. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons, surprise trips to Paris, front row seats at Fashion Week. He showered her with affection and attention, making her feel like the center of the universe. She was aware of his family's immense wealth, but she truly believed he was different. He seemed to chafe under the weight of the Davenport name, often complaining about his father's suffocating control. He once chartered a yacht for a weekend party and forgot to pay the final bill, leaving his father's office to clean up the $1 million mess. He had a tendency to drink too much at society events, his charming wit curdling into boorish arrogance. Each time, Lawrence Davenport would handle it, a quiet payment, a phone call to a newspaper editor, a donation to a charity to smooth things over. Genevieve saw it as a father protecting his son. She didn't yet see it as a CEO managing a volatile asset. Then came the summons to Lawrence's office. When she arrived, the atmosphere was clinical. Lawrence wasn't smiling. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his vast desk, the city skyline looming behind him like a conquered territory. It sounded less like a compliment and more like a statement of fact from a quarterly report. This is the prenuptial agreement. Our lawyers have drafted it. It's standard procedure for our family. Her heart sank. She and Preston had never discussed a prenup. Oh, I don't think. It's not a reflection on you, Lawrence cut in smoothly, misinterpreting her hesitation as a prelude to an objection. It is about protecting a century-old legacy. Davenport Industries is more than a company, it's an institution. This document ensures that institution remains secure, regardless of what life throws at any of us. She opened the folder. She saw figures with so many zeros they looked like typos. He should be the one talking to me about this. As I said, he's tied up, but he is fully aware and in complete agreement. In fact, he asked me to handle this for him. He finds these financial matters tedious. He wanted to spare you the awkwardness. Preston didn't find financial matters tedious, he was just monumentally irresponsible with them. To refuse was to detonate a bomb in the middle of her life. Where do I sign? He smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression of victory. He turned the document to the final page, where 2 signature lines were marked with yellow tabs. One for her, one for Preston Davenport III. Just here, he said, pointing to her line. Then the critical moment happened, the moment that 7 years later would become the linchpin of her entire case. Of course, Lawrence said. He started to close the folder, but then he paused, looking at her. And then he did something utterly bizarre. With a look of weary impatience, as if dealing with a minor but necessary chore, he said, "You know what? Let's just get this done." He opened the folder again, uncapped the pen, and with a swift, practiced motion, he signed the line marked, Preston Davenport III. "What are you doing?" That's Preston's line." He blotted the ink with a rocker blotter. He said it with such casual authority, such absolute conviction, that she, in her naivety, believed him. To her, a power of attorney sounded like an unbreakable legal bond. If he could sign for a corporate acquisition, surely he could sign this. She left the office in a daze. A few days later, a pristine, bound copy of the prenup arrived at her apartment via messenger. She glanced at the signature page. There it was, her trembling signature, and beneath it, a sharp, angular, authoritative signature on Preston's line. She'd never paid close attention to Preston's actual signature. It was usually an illegible scrawl on a restaurant check, so she had no reason to doubt it wasn't his. He thought he was above the law, Anna said, pacing in her office. Genevieve sat on the couch, a cup of tea untouched in her hands. Lawrence Davenport lives in a world where his will becomes reality. In corporate law, a power of attorney can be that powerful. But a prenuptial agreement is different. It's personal. It's an antenuptial contract, meaning, before the wedding. It requires the personal consent and signature of the 2 people getting married. A father cannot consent to marriage on his son's behalf, and he cannot sign away his son's marital rights for him. It fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the contract. "I never would have known," Genevieve said quietly. "I just accepted it. When I first brought you the papers, I didn't even remember it was him who signed." Weeks ago, she had asked for every single document Genevieve had. In a box of old papers, she found a birthday card from Preston from their first year together. Anna had looked at the scrawled signature inside the card, then at the sharp, decisive signature on the prenup. They weren't just different, they were polar opposites. He moved markets with a single phone call and considered politicians to be temporary employees. His worldview was simple: the world was divided into assets and liabilities. Everything else, from business competitors to, tragically, his own son, was a variable to be managed. The final straw had come 5 years before Preston even met Genevieve. At 25, Preston, in a fit of pique after Lawrence cut his allowance, had taken a company speedboat out with some friends and, blind drunk, crashed it into a pier in Miami, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage and injuring a dock worker. The scandal was immense. To the world, it was spun as a strategic restructuring of family assets. This was the context in which he'd viewed the prenuptial agreement. It was a financial contract designed to protect the primary asset, the family fortune, from a potential liability, a future ex-wife. It was simply one more document in a long line of documents he was legally empowered to execute for his wayward son. It was this mindset, this absolute belief in his own authority, that had led to his fatal error. During the 48-hour recess, the Davenport machine went into overdrive. Gregory Thorne was in a full-blown panic. He had personally assured Preston and Lawrence that the prenup was unassailable. Now he was facing the possibility of disbarment for submitting a potentially fraudulent document to the court, a document his own clients had given him. "You told me it was executed. How was I to know you signed it yourself? You have power of attorney." I assumed it was a legitimate, if unusual, execution of that power. Preston, meanwhile, was a ghost. He sat on a plush leather sofa, staring into space. That illusion had been ripped away in a public courtroom. He wasn't the powerful heir, he was a child whose father still signed his paperwork. The smirk he'd given Genevieve now seemed pathetic, a final, flickering ember of a fire that had been extinguished. Lawrence, seeing the uselessness of yelling at Thorne, turned his cold fury on his son. "And you? You couldn't even be bothered to show up and sign your own damned prenup. You were probably off chasing some tramp in Vegas while I was securing your future. You always want to handle everything. You never trusted me with anything, so you can't blame me when I don't act like a man." The battle lines were drawn not between husband and wife, but between father and son. His second move was to try and buy his way out. "They're rattled," Anna said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. For a moment, Genevieve was tempted. $5 million was life-changing money. It was safety. It was freedom. She could disappear and start a new life. Sam, who had come with her for support, squeezed her hand under the table. "That's a lot of money, Jen." But then Genevieve thought about Lawrence's cold, dismissive smile. This wasn't just about money anymore. They weren't offering this out of generosity, they were offering it to cover up their wrongdoing, to purchase her silence. It would mean letting them win. "What do you think will happen if we fight?" Genevieve asked Anna. The number was staggering, almost abstract. But that wasn't the deciding factor. The deciding factor was the look in Anna's eyes, a look that said, "We can win this." "Tell them no," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Tell them we'll see them in court." She was no longer the scared 24-year-old in Lawrence Davenport's office. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, weary demeanor. Preston sat beside him, looking smaller in his expensive suit, his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table in front of him. He wasn't there to support his son, he was there to watch over his investment. His face was an unreadable mask of stoic fury. Anna Sharma was the picture of composure. She began by formally calling her expert witness, Dr. Albert Reed, to the stand. Anna projected 2 documents onto the large screens in the courtroom. The other was the birthday card Preston had written to Genevieve years ago. "Dr. Reed," Anna began, "could you please describe to the court the process you used to analyze these 2 signatures?" "The signature on the birthday card, what we're calling the known sample," Dr. Reed explained, pointing with a laser, "is fluid, written quickly with a rightward slant and low pen pressure in the upstrokes. It is consistent with dozens of other samples of Preston Davenport III's signature we've examined from checks and other personal documents." He then directed the laser to the prenup. "The signature on the contested document is fundamentally different. It is written deliberately, with heavy, consistent pressure. The letter formations are sharp, almost calligraphic. The T crossing is high and firm, whereas in Mr. Davenport's known signature, it is often a quick, trailing stroke. They are, in my expert opinion, written by 2 different hands." "And have you formed an opinion on who wrote the signature on the prenuptial agreement?" "Yes," Dr. Reed said. "We were also provided with numerous authenticated samples of Mr. Lawrence Davenport's signature from corporate filings. The signature on the prenuptial agreement is, to a scientific certainty, a match for Lawrence Davenport." A wave of gasps and frantic typing filled the room. Thorne's objection was weak. "Your Honor, this proves nothing. My client's father had power of attorney. Your Honor, the defense seems to be clinging to the idea of a power of attorney as a magic wand that makes this all disappear. But we'd like to explore the circumstances under which this document was signed. She called her next witness. It was a woman named Maria Flores, Lawrence Davenport's former executive assistant, who had retired 2 years ago. Ms. Flores, a nervous but dignified woman in her early 70s, took the stand. Do you recall a meeting between Mr. Davenport and Genevieve Hayes in May of 2018? And was Preston Davenport III present at that meeting? Do you know where he was? Ms. Flores hesitated, looking toward Lawrence, whose glare could have melted steel. Mr. Davenport told Ms. Hayes that his son was in a business meeting in Delaware. That was not true. Thorne shot to his feet. Anna rephrased. I had access to all his corporate credit card statements and travel itineraries. It was my job to reconcile them for Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Flores looked the judge in the eye. He was at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. He had been there for 3 days. The records showed charges for over $20,000 at the high-limit poker tables and a charge from a nightclub for bottle service. The dam broke. Preston sank even lower in his chair, his face burning with shame. But Anna wasn't finished. A prenuptial agreement is perhaps the most personal contract a person can sign. It contemplates the potential end of a marriage. It requires full financial disclosure, independent counsel, and, most importantly, the willing and direct consent of the two people whose lives it will govern. What we have here is not a valid contract. We have a document born of deception and signed by proxy. It is legally and morally worthless. The unraveling was complete. His entire case, built on the document Lawrence had handed him, had been dismantled piece by piece. There was no cross-examination that could fix this. Preston finally looked up, his eyes meeting Genevieve's across the courtroom. There was no anger left in them, only a hollowed-out emptiness. He saw her, truly saw her for the first time in years, not as an accessory or an inconvenience, but as the woman whose trust he and his father had casually betrayed. In that moment, he knew he had lost more than money. He had lost the last shred of his own dignity. The smirk was a distant memory, replaced by the stark, humiliating truth. The courtroom fallout was a Category 5 hurricane. Lawrence Davenport, for the first time in his public life, looked shaken. That evening, the remaining members of Team Davenport-Lawrence, a deflated Preston, and a frantic Gregory Thorne convened in the family's war room, a soundproofed study in the penthouse. The mood was grim. Lawrence slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. So we fight dirtier. Find something on her. Anything. I don't care what it costs. Everyone has a secret. This was the Davenport way. When legal tactics failed, they resorted to character assassination. Within days, the smear campaign began. A notorious gossip blog suddenly ran an exclusive story. The headline screamed, "Gold Diggers Plot Exposed, Prenup Bride Secret Past with Married Art Professor." They included photos of her from college, looking young and happy, now cast in a sinister light. Genevieve felt like she'd been physically assaulted. Reporters were camped outside her apartment building. This is what they do. They can't win honestly, so they try to ruin you. Sam wrapped her in a hug. But the mud was sticking. The comments online were vicious. She was a schemer, a harlot, an opportunist. This is a good sign, she told Genevieve over the phone. It's a sign of desperation, Genevieve. It's the last, desperate act of a cornered animal. They know they've lost in court, so they're trying to win in the court of public opinion. Don't respond. Don't make a statement. We stay focused on the law. The pressure was immense. It was more subtle, but far more menacing. Lawrence, through a series of shell corporations, began making inquiries about the small art gallery where Genevieve had dreamed of working again. He was trying to suffocate her future, to show her that even if she won in court, his reach was long, and he could make her life difficult in 1,000 different ways. Preston, meanwhile, was a ghost in the machine. He was caught between his father's vengeful rage and his own dawning sense of guilt. He did something he hadn't done in a decade: he acted without his father's permission. He got Genevieve's new, private cell number from a mutual acquaintance and called her. She answered wearily. "Hello." Silence. I just wanted to say. "I'm sorry," Preston stammered, "about the article. It's not right. It's my father. He's what, Preston?" Genevieve's voice was ice. "Out of control. Or is he just being himself? The man you've allowed to run your life since the day I met you?" It was a twisted sort of kindness, born of weakness. He wasn't telling her to fight for herself, he was telling her to surrender because he was too afraid to stand up to his own father. It galvanized her. She would not be smeared. "But I'm done running. I'm done being sensible. I'm done doing what the Davenports think is best for me." She attached a sworn affidavit from the art gallery owner and a printout of the gossip blog post, tracing its ownership back to a PR firm with long-standing ties to Davenport Industries. Genevieve Hayes was not backing down. She was fighting back. The final day in court was less a legal battle and more a coronation of the truth. The motion for sanctions was taken under advisement, a clear threat hanging over Lawrence's head. He tried to argue that even if the signature was Lawrence's, the intent of the agreement was clear, and that Genevieve had benefited from the marriage for 7 years. She spoke directly to the judge, her voice filled with a quiet, righteous power. In his world, his power of attorney is a crown, allowing him to act as king on behalf of a prince who refused to grow up. She paused, letting the words settle. When he placed that prenuptial agreement in front of a young, trusting woman, he wasn't seeking a fair contract, he was demanding fealty. When he lied about his son's whereabouts, he wasn't simplifying paperwork, he was committing fraud. And when he arrogantly signed his own name in place of his son's, he made a fatal miscalculation. It was about dignity. It was about whether the powerful are allowed to write their own rules at the expense of others. It was about the validity of one woman's life, partnership, and contributions, which the Davenport family sought to erase with a fraudulent document and a check for her silence. Anna sat down. She looked at Preston, whose face was ashen. She looked at Lawrence, whose mask of composure was finally cracking, revealing the seething rage beneath. And then she looked at Genevieve, who met her gaze with quiet strength. "A prenuptial agreement is a unique and deeply personal contract," the judge continued, her words a direct rebuke to Lawrence. She then turned to Preston. Preston flinched as if he'd been slapped. "This court will proceed with the division of marital assets under the standard equitable distribution laws of the state of New York. A forensic accounting of the marital estate is hereby ordered. This hearing is adjourned." The aftermath was swift. The media exploded with the story of the invalidated prenup. The Davenport name was dragged through the mud, not by Genevieve, but by their own hubris. Lawrence was humbled in a way no corporate rival had ever managed. Preston, stripped of his father's protection and his own illusions, was forced to confront the empty shell he had become. In the end, the settlement awarded to Genevieve was astronomical, a figure that ensured she would be independent for the rest of her life. But as Genevieve walked out of the courthouse past the flashing cameras, the victory didn't feel like a financial windfall. It felt like breathing after being held underwater for 7 years. A few years later, the Davenport name was a whisper, a cautionary tale told in boardrooms and exclusive clubs. Preston faded into obscurity, a ghost of Park Avenue. And Genevieve? She didn't disappear. It supported emerging female artists, giving them the chances she had been denied. She found love again, not in a whirlwind of helicopters and diamonds, but in the quiet, steady gaze of a man who saw her, not as an accessory, but as the entire masterpiece. Her life was no longer a gilded cage, but a wide-open canvas, and she was finally holding the brush. In a world that often seems tilted in favor of the rich and powerful, Genevieve Hayes's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the truth is the great equalizer. It's a testament to the idea that no one is above the law and that fighting for your own dignity is always a battle worth waging. If this story of resilience, justice, and the ultimate triumph of truth captivated you, please let us know by hitting that like button. And for more incredible stories like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update.